Hey, today's guest is Chris Dixon, who is a venture capitalist and the author of this book, Read, Write, Own. We talk about the future of writing, where all of this is going, so that you can start thinking about your career, what it is that you want to do as a writer, and start thinking about how do I make money, how do I position myself well for the future. It was through writing on the internet that he became a big name in Silicon Valley. You've probably heard ideas like come for the tools, stay for the network. What nerdy people are doing now is what the smartest people will be doing in 10 years. He coined those terms. He was one of those OG bloggers back in the day, and he must have written 300, 500 blog posts, had a bunch of conversations, built and sold 2 companies. And then he took a step back and he said, I have something important to say, something valuable to share with the world, and I want to turn that into a book. So, hey, let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Chris Dixon. Chris, you're somebody who stands out as a particular kind of writer, somebody who's written literally hundreds of blog posts that really influenced me, thought about these things for decades, and then packaged the best ideas that came out of the things that you wrote, the comments, the conversations, and then turned that into a book. Tell me about that process.
So, I've been sort of interested in computers my whole life. I ended up going a little off the path and actually studying philosophy in college and getting a master's degree where I did a lot of writing as part of that program. And then in the early 2000s, got excited about the internet and started a career there where I became an entrepreneur. I started 2 internet startups and since then have switched to investing in internet startups. Along the way, I think around 2008 or so, decided, I felt like I was, well, one, that was sort of the for those who are active on the internet, that was sort of the beginning, middle of the rise of social media. And so people were just sort of getting more active online, and Twitter was starting to grow, and blogging was a thing. And I thought that was exciting just from an internet trends point of view. And then I just felt like I had a lot to say. And so I started blogging, and like a lot of things, probably, like I think for my first, I don't know, almost a year, I don't think anyone was reading it. So it's like a lot of these activities, like you have to be doing it because you actually enjoy it, because there was no like purpose beyond that because no one's reading it. I think it was actually one day Fred Wilson, I don't know if folks know him, he's a longtime blogger, venture capitalist who's a good friend and incredibly smart. And had a following, and one day linked to me, because that was sort of the thing that happened. You'd hope someone would link to you, and he linked to me, and I started getting some traffic. And then I had to comment. Back then, you'd have blogs with comment sections, and I had this sort of community. Then I would be very active in responding to them, and it really became a fun thing. I actually thought of it as like I tried to do. I think about a blog post a week, and the way I would think about it is. So I believe that, especially on the internet, people are very sensitive to authenticity, and that if you write something that isn't authentic, they can tell. I don't know, maybe I'm being overly optimistic. And so my kind of personal challenge was to summarize an interesting thing I learned that week. And so sort of I'd go through the week, I'd hopefully have interesting conversations with people. If I'm talking to interesting people and I'm thinking, I would hopefully have like one new idea. And then I would, at the end of the week or sometime like that, try to write that idea down. It was very short, often a couple paragraphs. Sometimes I go longer. It was a weird thing where I'd learned that like probably the sweet spot was like 4 paragraphs. And if I went too long, it would actually get sort of less attention, and too short, you probably couldn't really state an idea. So it's really kind of like a concept, like it'd be like one concept. And that was just it was really fun. It was just like a, kind of like learning in public, I would say. One
thing that you're really good at that I want to learn from you is one-liners. Come for the tools, stay for the network. The things that basically the nerds are doing now, the smartest people will be doing in 10 years. And that's what you would do. You'd find a concept, a phrase, a sentence.
Like the next big thing starts out looking like a toy.
Exactly.
That was like a big one.
You have like 8 of those.
Yeah.
And you would focus on that. You'd write that. And the thing that helped you was, I don't think you tried to be too fancy. You weren't like going down the lane, doing some like crazy 360 through the leg slam dunk. You're just like dropping it in every single week.
Yeah.
And it worked well for you.
I do think a lot of that was due to my, like what I was doing during the week though. Like I remember Come for the Tool State for the Network. I was like in a meeting and I was talking to an entrepreneur and I was explaining kind of this, Come for the Tool State for the Network is a strategy for building networks, for kind of getting adoption for networks. So I can go into that if people want. But, and I remember just it was through, sort of through the
conversation.
Kind of just the activity of having lots of conversations. And at one point I said that and I was like, hey, maybe I should call a blog post that. And like, so I think it wouldn't have happened had I been sort of just sitting in a chair thinking of what's a clever phrase or something, right? It kind of came through intellectual sparring. And look, I'm very fortunate in that the job I do is basically involves talking to smart people. And so you're just sort of constantly refining ideas and building them, right? And so I think that's some of where it came from. And then, blogging has this the nice thing about blogging, I think people kind of underestimate, is when you write something kind of boring or dumb, maybe it's almost like a self-regulating machine because like no one pays attention to it. So people are like, you have all these great phrases. Well, I wrote 500 blog posts and like 10 went viral and people remember those. And then you're like, there were 490 where I probably missed, right? But it's sort of this it's self-regulating in the sense that those don't get as popular. And
you were writing probably at least around October 2010, maybe 2015, like those years, sometime through then. You were writing maybe every 10 to 14 days. You were writing a lot.
That's probably right, yeah. I thought it was more like once a week, but maybe it's, yeah. I know I counted at one point there were 500 blog posts over whatever the math is on that over a 4-year period of
You're writing a lot.
Yeah. And then kind of switched, unfortunately, to Twitter and life, jobs and life and everything else took,
You have this interesting idea about how Twitter is almost unserious and that if people could take writing more seriously in the way that you were doing it, there's so much low-hanging fruit here.
Yeah, no, so let me qualify that. Like, I think, I think it's generally been a very positive thing that the internet has democratized publishing, that anyone can now put something on the internet. And I think things like Twitter have been important in that they made it really easy. Like blogging, when I did it, you had to fiddle with like a website and RSS, and there was just all this kind of stuff. And then you had to build an audience. And like, one of the benefits of these modern social networks is they do kind of sometimes try to help you, at least initially, get, through the algorithmic feed, get an audience. So I don't want to be like overly negative, but I do think that there is a lot of value in sort of longer form writing, and both in the sense of just as a way to communicate ideas, but I also think just career-wise, like in my industry, in the tech industry, I think that a kind of a hack that is to me is very surprisingly underused. Let's say you're early in your career person who's interested in artificial intelligence, and you want to build a profile as a kind of a thinker in that area. To me, the shortest and you can, I think in the course of 2 months, you can become like a high profile person if you write a bunch of interesting blog posts on the topic. I don't think that happens in the same way when you write like just a few sentences on Twitter. And I think that the ease of social media has lulled a lot of people into thinking that a video on TikTok or a tweet is the right way to kind of go out and share their knowledge. When in fact, the kind of stuff you talk about on the show and just, actual writing of like a lot of ideas just simply cannot be stated in short form in the right way, like to really kind of get the concept through. I thought when I was blogging, in that period, so like I guess 15 years ago now, I thought I was just sort of at the frontier of something. And that of course, like, because it so dramatically accelerated my career to blog, because it just suddenly, I was in New York, which, the tech world is like, at the time was minor leagues, right? Everything was in the Bay Area. I just, I had a startup that I had sold, but it was a security startup. It wasn't super well known. And through blogging was just able to, sort of become part of the kind of Silicon Valley world. I eventually joined, a big Silicon Valley firm and moved to California. And I contribute almost all of that to writing. And so I assumed I was going to be at the frontier, and that of course everyone else would figure this out, and that it would just be this thing that people do, and that like you building your career and your writing, like this is just like the way to stand out in an intellectual field, right? But it surprises me that it really hasn't happened to the extent that I expected it to. I mean, blogging is kind of weird, talking about it before the video, there's like Tyler Cowen and sort of these old school Fred Wilson, and there's like some people that still kind of blog, but for the most part, like that art form of like writing a page or 2 pages it certainly isn't as popular as one would expect given just how the explosion of social media, I guess.
Yeah, when I look at your writing, there's a real simplicity to it, a real practicality. And I'm curious to hear how much of that is from your background as an engineer, knowing languages like Python, and then how much of it is from the kind of writing that you did at Columbia.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is. I had a fantastic. I loved my experience since college. For me, it was just sort of this like awakening. In retrospect, I don't think I knew how to write. It's funny. My parents were English professors, and so you'd think I would know how to write, but and they used to make me write and things, but actually, when I look at it, like one of the things they did in college was they would go through with a red pen and just be like every little thing. And one of the particular things they would do that I remember very clearly was they would write pretentious. They had some shorthand for it, pretentious diction. Like whenever you chose a word that could have been simpler. This might have been a philosophy-specific thing. Yeah. Like choose the simpler word.
You philosophers love to get crazy with that.
No, and if you read the best philosophy, in my opinion, just to take Bertrand Russell or something, like one of these kind of classic philosophers, or any of the, I did analytic philosophy, so that's sort of, for those who don't know, like philosophy kind of forked, around the 1850s or something, and there's sort of Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein. And then a bunch of modern ones. Then there's continental philosophy, which is like, Hegel and the existentialists and things. So I was on the kind of more of the science and philosophy of mind and language and all that. And that's that world. There was a real emphasis on simplicity, economy. I think of a lot of my favorite philosophy books and essays. They're really short. There's almost no jargon. There's almost no footnotes. It's just like a pure like there's just a new, like the best philosophy to my mind is like just a new idea. It's just a brand new idea. And once you express the idea, it's like, oh, wow, that's a new idea. And then like maybe you tease out the implications of the idea, but that's it. It's just like a new idea, right? Like you're in the idea business. You're producing ideas. You think of it as a business, your supply chain. It's like you're at the mouth of the river. You're creating the new ideas. And then downstream, people can take those ideas and implement them in various ways. But like real philosophy is like idea production, right?
Yeah, it's a nice way.
Anyway, so that was very influential on me, and I always thought of like anytime, there's a thing people do if they write. Like it's funny, like a lot of people like they speak very well, but then suddenly they write and it becomes formal. Have you seen this thing?
I was reviewing a job description that some people on our team at Read a Passage wrote yesterday, and one of the things I've started doing is I review in Google Docs, and a lot of times my comments in Google Docs are harsh. So what I'll do is then I'll make a Loom video after. Yeah. I got this from Tim Ferriss said he did this when he came on the show. And I was like, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And the number one piece of feedback I said was, you're writing like you're trying to write. You're not writing like you're talking to me. Just pretend that this person is right in front of you and you're trying to describe what they're doing at the job in 5 to 8 bullet points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And just be super direct, super clear. And don't type this. Just go for a walk.
It's funny, right?
And just say it.
It's very funny how that it's almost like if you're not trained, it takes training to write like you speak. Do
you know the Miles Davis line on this? He says, jazz musician, he says, sometimes it takes a long time to be able to play like yourself.
That's great. Yeah. So that's perfect. Yeah. No, that's right. I think, and so that, I don't know. So for me, like it just, yes, it took a long time to learn to play like myself, to speak obviously in good writing, you do it better, right? I'm like the things I'm saying now, like they aren't structured perfectly. They aren't, so you're sort of the best version of yourself, right? The best version of the way you speak and has your voice and things.
Does engineering factor into this? Because this to me is one of Silicon Valley's big contributions to writing in general is simplicity, clarity, directness.
Yeah, maybe. I think there is this in engineering, right? There is this like there is a emphasis on economy, economy, modularity. I mean, my book, my editor would he said one of the eccentric things about my book is that, well, I chunked it into 3 to 4. So it's meant to be read cover to cover, but you can read it in 3 to 4 page chunks, which is what engineers would call modularity, right? Like it's like each thing sort of stands alone. And also, he thought it was eccentric, my editor, that I sometimes, and many places will say, refer to other sections.
Like a hyperlink.
Like a hyperlink, which I thought about removing, but he thought it in the end. I thought it was nice because that way you could jump around and see it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I can't really. I think for myself, I mean, like it is symbol manipulation. I think one of the things I like through the process of writing the book, I think one of the interesting things for me writing the book was, and I'm guessing this is true for a lot of other people, is that my editing ability was far ahead of my writing ability.
Huh.
Is that not the case for everyone else?
Say more about that.
Well,
That's
no, what I mean is like, and this has always been, I think I've closed the gap over the course of practicing. What I mean is, I think for a long time, I mean, I read a lot, and I assume you do. I assume most of the viewers do. And if you read a lot, you know, your ear knows that like this is good writing, this is bad writing. And so like I think I've had an ear for a long time to be able to say this is good, bad writing. As a writer, my challenge has been I'll write something and I'll be like something is off, but I don't know what it is, right? Like I found that to be my challenge, therefore, it was a very slow process writing. Like I'm talking about like when I blogged as an example. Like I would rewrite these things and I'd be like, why is this off? And, you know, and so one of the things one of the things of actually writing a book that I found it dramatically improved on was fixing that feedback loop. Now, when I see something's off, I'm pretty quick at saying, okay, wait, what is it that I'm hearing that's off and how do I fix it? It's because of the topic sentence is wrong, the clause is in the wrong place, the word choice is wrong.
I think it's sort of like how you know what's wrong with all your friends' lives, but you don't really know what's wrong with your life. And sometimes you can just see other people's writing clearly.
Yeah.
And I think that there might even be an ego thing attached with your own writing, because here's something I found. When I write something and I've just finished it, I either think it's the worst thing ever or the greatest thing ever, and never in between. I'm either like, I want to marry this or I never want to see this again. Whereas then when I step away from it, I have a bit more of a neutral, objective view at what's good and bad. And I don't think I have that emotional attachment with other people's writing. So I can often look at it and just go, these are the 3 things that need to change. But my question for you is, do you think that awareness, that understanding is a function of time, or was it some insight that got unlocked in your mind that allowed you to see more clearly?
This is going back to your question, engineering. I mean, in some sense, I mean, like writing, like coding, is symbol manipulation, right? You are manipulating symbols that have certain. Now, there's, I think, with writing English, or natural language, it's not, of course, just like code in the sense of like it just performs. It's not just sort of purely utilitarian. There's connotation and poetic what does it evoke? The emotional kind of qualities of it. There's a whole bunch of other aspects, but at some level it is symbol manipulation. And like, really just, I think it's just, for me at least, rote practice of, what something sounds off here. Oh, it's, passive, too much passive voice, the adjectives, too many adjectives doing too much work. I'm telling, not showing. I'm, the transition is off and I need to fix the way the clauses are structured. It just becomes a lot of tactical things of like how, at least for me, that was a lot of the, just sheer practice. I spent 12 months, significant portion of 12 months on the actual act of writing this book, and just over and over and over. And then like, how to structure sections. Like, there's obviously there's classic techniques. I do a lot in this book. I do kind of the classic rhetoric style in each section where it's, you'll have an intro that's kind of a more concrete, maybe anecdote. It moves into the main argument, moves into the supporting arguments for the main proposition, the supporting arguments, sort of steel manning, giving the best version of counter arguments, answering those counter arguments, and then sort of tying it back to the original, the kind of the beginning, and to give the reader a sense of through that process, both, right? Like that's a common, I mean, that would be sort of my default structure. I think if you do it too much, it becomes formulaic. But I think if you read a lot of the sections of the book, like particularly if readers want to, we'll jump more into the book, but like the last third of the book is sort of these 7 application areas, sort of different use cases for blockchains. And in those are each kind of standalone sections, and they all kind of follow roughly that kind of format. And that format I think is nice because it has sort of an emotional element. It has an intellectual element. You're showing all the counter arguments. You're, if presenting him in the strongest way, being kind of intellectually honest and kind of going through everything, and then sort of giving the reader a sense of progress through that. The biggest challenge with this book is a lot of the ideas are abstract. It requires some kind of prerequisite knowledge. But I wanted to write a book that was entertaining to read and backed up by data and stories, and not just sort of abstractions, right? Not like overly philosophical. And so to the extent I could, I tried to structure it somewhat chronologically and kind of go through the history of the internet. I think each chapter I thought of as its own kind of challenge, in that how could I make it, a big part of the challenge was how can I make it simpler?
And when you talk about really getting it down to be simple, how did that happen? Was it looking at drafts? Was it rewriting paragraphs, sentences, sharing revisions?
Many. I mean, I had thousands of iterations. So I'll tell the rough history of the book is I wrote a first kind of draft of the first kind of 2/3 of it, like probably in a month or two, and I had something on paper. And then there were a bunch of problems with it, obviously. One was it was too abstract, too much passive voice, too much reliance on tell, not show, like crutch words, I'd call them, adjectives, adverbs. So instead of, I would say things like digital ownership is a big concept in the book. And I would say things like genuine ownership. And like the word genuine is doing a lot of work there. Like, what does that mean? Right. And so I basically, or like blockchains can make strong commitments. Strong is doing a lot of work there. Like, what does that mean? By the way, I had a lot of readers. I had, I work with a team of 80 people on my team. And of that, probably, first of all, I have a guy, Robert Hackett, who's a former writer who's incredibly helpful to me. I had, he is a writer, but he was a former journalist. I had 20 people on my team who did very thorough reads and like would give paragraph level comments. Yeah. Like very paragraph, like really like almost every paragraph comments. Hey, I don't buy this argument. Hey, here's a counter argument. Hey, this phrase didn't land for me.
Did you give them their own Google Docs or have them all do it in the same place?
So I used mostly Google Doc, and I would basically like copy the Google Doc and send it to them or something. It was always this, it's always this thing with writing where you have like the master copy and then like this version, and then you're like trying to merge the 14 comments together. And then
you change 17, but you're actually on 23. You're like, oh my goodness.
Google helps a lot. I was using Word for a little while, and I hadn't used Word in years, and I was like, they must be better now because I hadn't used it in 15. It's not better. It's like, I thought it was just god awful, but like the fonts are all over the place, and I don't even know what's going on in that thing. And you can't share, and then I was trying to use Word with Dropbox. If you're having other people edit it and trying to do version control, I don't know, maybe I was doing it wrong, but I just thought it was a nightmare. The problem with Google specifically, though, is once I kept hitting this kind of comment limit where it would just start acting buggy. I think it was because I had so many comments, and so I'd have to every 2 weeks copy and paste and create a new thing, which was really annoying. Yeah, like it was basically, like it was fine. It basically worked and it was fine. But yeah, so I sent it out. So I'd done the first draft. One of the big problems with it, like someone in a friendly way called it encyclopedic at times, which was their friendly way of saying kind of boring and not well written. Like basically there were sections where I was explaining stuff where I just kind of like list stuff, right? Like there was no narrative form. There was no structure. There was no story. And so it's been a lot of time. I think I actually think I'll give you an example. Like a chapter I really like is called software. It's a community created software. It's really about this concept composability. And that was a chapter. It's a very abstract concept. It's a very important concept. And I feel like that was one where like I spent a lot of time on that and finally really nailed that one. I feel like I feel generally like I did. There's a few, maybe I won't say which one. There's like 2 chapters that still, I feel like I never kind of fully cracked how to do in a way, in like the full way I wanted to. And, I had a lot of discussions about this with with people that were helping me, and in the end thought maybe there's just some parts where you just simply have to kind of convey information.
Well, I think a lot of the work of doing something like this is thinking through what sort of analogy or metaphor am I going to use.
Yeah, I do a lot of analogy. You see, like the city analogy comes back a lot.
Right here, you have composability. Okay, refers to a property of software that allows smaller pieces to be assembled into larger compositions. I'm like, okay, because I'm basically your target reader. I'm fairly interested in this. I feel like this is the sort of book that could interest me, but I'm not like steeped in crypto lore. But that section is called Software as Lego Bricks. And now I'm like, now I see that. Now I get it instantly. Yeah. And I feel like that was a lot of the work that you needed to do in this book.
That was another part, was sectioning it like that. Like that, I think in the initial one, it was chapters, and it took me a long time to get it down to these 2 to 3 page sections to give them kind of nice, simple titles. By the way, one of my North Stars here is everything is for the reader. So there was nothing like whenever there was a choice, like, do I put a chart? How do I title this? Like, what is simpler? What is clear? What is more for the reader? Like very little jargon in the book. I hope. I don't think there's any jargon I don't think there's any words that are not common words where I don't explain and define them. And I don't think there's that many of them. So for example, like in the blockchains, people use the word decentralization a lot. I almost never, it probably occurs in the book, but it's certainly not commonly occurs. Like everything tries to kind of, how do we reduce it to simplicity? So going back to the process, so I had 20 readers or something, had a big rewrite. I think it was one of the best rewrites was, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like removing every adjective and adverb. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but essentially it was like these things like strong ownership, genuineness, very, I don't think the word varies in the book. I hope it isn't. Maybe this is somewhere, but
if it is, we'll burn it.
Yeah, but like very, like, look, tech books, like there's a thing where, especially in tech books, where people try to hype things up.
Right.
And they use all of these superlatives. And so, I feel like every time there's like a word vary, what that really means is I haven't explained it well enough. Because if I explain it well enough in a bunch of simple descriptive phrases, the reader will get it. It's like, it's very, wow, this is a better, this design is better than this design. Don't say that. Show them and like show the consequences and tell the stories and show how it affects people.
I say the same thing with exclamation points. If somebody writes with an exclamation point, they intuitively know that the language isn't strong enough and they're trying to compensate.
I think that's right. And I think I agree with you. And I think that I would say that there's subtler, the only twist I would put on what you just said is that there are words that act in the same way as an exclamation point, right? And you need to look for the crutch words, as I'm calling them. And so that was a big change. Like passive voice, and passive voice is not just a simple matter of switching it, right? It takes work because you're like, wait, who did that? The internet was built to be a decentralized system. That's not a good sentence. What is a good sentence is, Vint Cerf did this, Tim Berners did the, like what actually happened, right? So it's not just passive voice. It's not like you can just, plug it into ChatGPT and say, give me active voice. Like it means you need to go do the work of like what happened, right? Like tell a story, right? So that was a huge rewrite. That was like a multi-month process. Then I sort of wrote the first draft, did the kind of like these kind of rewrites like this, had 20, I thanked them in the acknowledgement. I think it was about 20 people. And some were general readers, some were technologists. We had a few lawyers because of some legal sections. And they went through the paragraph level. And then I went through all of those and, sometimes rejected the comments, but mostly took them into account. I did another rewrite where I would call it kind of like, I was kind of defensive. Like I would bring up counter arguments to some of my arguments and then just sort of say they're wrong. And then I did a rewrite, which I think has really improved it, which it changed that. So like there's a part, it's in the take rate section on some of the objections. Like there's a Moxie Marlinspike, who's this respected security researcher, who has this kind of very, I think, intelligent objection to some of my arguments. And the original version was sort of like, here's his argument, he's wrong. And now it's actually, here's his argument, that's a good argument. Here are the design lessons one should take away from it, right? And I did that a lot throughout the book. I really sort of said like what the network governance section, which is sort of how do you control and govern networks. Originally, I was sort of making these claims of like, now with blockchains, you can do much better governance. And I finally realized like, that's too strong a statement. what blockchains really let you do is they let you have a much richer design space where you can design new governance systems, but we haven't figured out the best way to do it. And so I rewrote that so really try to make it like, to really support the claims and like show the weak points, show where things are not figured out, and like make it more honest and authentic. I don't know, I think that's a big problem with tech, particularly tech business books, is that they don't do that. And so I really wanted this book to be different and to be just like honest, descriptive, simple declarative sentences, no hype. No, I don't know. Hopefully that came through.
Yeah, it did. Well, one of the things that you're so good at is one-liners. And my favorite new Chris Dixon one-liner in this is that blockchains go from don't be evil to can't be evil. That's so good. So tell me the story of that. And do you like get excited when you find something like that? Because that's the sort of stuff that really sticks in people's brains.
Well, that was so Google's famous. So when they started, they were supposed to be a different company than all the other tech companies, and that they were going to be don't be evil. That was their motto. And I don't know. You can debate. I guess people could debate how Google is today. I certainly think they haven't lived up to that motto now. And to look at the search results and everything else, and like just the way the company behaves, I think I'm very disappointed. And so, one of the promises of blockchains is that now you don't have to rely on corporate promises and legal. Today, how do you trust Google? You're supposed to click through the 50-page privacy policy that pops up. That have you ever read those or negotiated those? Like that's our current trust system on the internet. Like it's a ridiculous system. Or the management promises don't be evil or something. And one of the major benefits of a blockchain is you remove all that stuff and you simply encode, in the blockchain code that's public and verifiable, what the rules are. Here's the rules of this social network. Here's the rules of this game. Here's the rules of this marketplace. And it's built in there. And if the blockchain, if you build in those, you can build good and bad blockchains like any technology. You can build evil blockchains or good, but if you build a good one, you build it right. The right one will have encoded in it that its rules, and ideally those rules are. It's not that you have to trust it to not be evil. It cannot be evil, right? Can't be evil. So that's where the can't be evil comes from.
As you were thinking, this title is really good.
Oh, thanks.
And
that was debated a lot by other people. I was always very adamant about that title, but that was not always popular.
I think it's really good because I think that it has a few things going for it. The first is it helps me remember the history, that there was the read-only era of the internet. Then we see the democratization of publishing. That's where we're at now. And then now we're moving into the ownership layer or the ownership time of the internet when we can actually have incentive structures and own a piece of these digital assets. And you wrote a piece, I think it's the oldest piece on your site on naming things. It was about naming startups.
Oh, did I?
And I went back and read it today.
Yeah, I mean, like there was debate, like, some of the people helping me were like, is it too obscure? People don't know what that means. Should it be called blockchains or Web3 or something? I felt like this was an important name because, as you said, it really is about kind of the history and the evolution. And so for those who don't know, the way I describe in the book is there's sort of 3 eras of the internet: the read era, the write era, and the own era. And I explain in detail like why those words, are used. But I also like that it's just, they're simple words. To me, that says, I hope that signals accessibility.
Yep.
Like, I want this to be accessible.
Yep.
Like, that was my main thing with this book. I want it to be, anyone feels like they are welcome to read it, like, and they will understand it. And I'm not trying to, I'm trying to include them, not exclude them. I also feel like when I got the physical book, I just got the first one like 2 weeks ago. It's hard for me to look at this objectively, but I feel like when I glance through it, they're like short, relatively simple words, not a lot of jargon. It feels like, there's not a lot of, I actually like Random House's style a lot. If their house style, they removed a lot of punctuation, which I liked actually in retrospect. Like it just reads more like a novel or something. They picked this font, which actually there's this cute little page at the end where it describes the font.
That guy from 1722.
they put this in there, but I liked it. It was like, look, that's it looks like an old style font. Like with the picture on the cover, this is this great artist that I hired.
It's so indulgent. This book was set in Caslin, a typeface first designed in 1722 by William Caslin. It's so indulgent. The Roman is considered a workhorse typeface due to its pleasant, open appearance, while the italic is exceedingly decorative. It's so funny. Also, as a contrast, you did not write that.
No, Random House put that in there, and I thought it was kind of endearing, and so I didn't say anything. I mean, I assume that's like something you do. You have to credit the font or something.
I think it's great. I think it's so funny, especially as a contrast to the rest of the book.
Yeah, But do most books don't have the font thing? I don't know where that came from. I never asked Random House about that.
Exceedingly decorative. You could write for 1,000 years and never put those two words together.
I do like the font. I think it looks, when I look at the book, maybe this is my philosophy background, it feels like a kind of a philosophy book, like an older school book. And like I wanted the cover to be kind of like, there's this really great artist who did the cover. He did a bunch of covers and chose that one. But just so feel like a accessible kind of book and not like kind of heavy jargon book. And so, but my agent called the book, he called Read Write Own gnomic, which is like, kind of mysterious, mystical, like kind of like you hear Read Write Own, what is that? Kind of cryptic, I guess. I don't know. We'll see.
We've spoken about your short blog post, 4 paragraphs, spoken about a book. How is writing something like this different from what I think is a masterful piece, How Aristotle Created the Computer, which you put in the Atlantic 2018 or so? Yeah. How was that piece different from writing a book?
Well, the big thing with the book, look, it's the obvious part with the book is, obviously it's longer and it takes more time, but that actually it's not just the length, right? Because what happens with the length is that you have, so a couple things. Like I found that I could only reread the book every 2 weeks or so, in the sense of, so like one of the hard things with the book that's not hard in the blog post, right, is like repetition and omission. Like, did I say that already? Mm-hmm. Right? And like, has that concept been explained? Like, now on page 60, I'm picking up an idea on page 30. Like, is that too far away? Did I explain it fully? Am I repeating it? In a lot of drafts, I had way too much repetition. Like, let me re-explain composability and like, and so, but is it too much repetition or is it too far away? Can you refer back to it? Like, you kind of have to have a fresh read to do that, right? That's what I mean by every 2 weeks. If I read it I could read it again, like whatever, it takes 6 hours to read a book or something. I don't know what it takes, but I couldn't read it fresh, right? I couldn't read it with fresh eyes. And so I wouldn't be able to spot the repetition and things. So I found that, like, for example, I had to wait 2 weeks. And so I had this whole process where, like, in those 2 weeks, I would sort of hack away on like one section and sort of try to figure out a section. And then, if I figure out, how to structure it, how to make it compelling, how to simplify the ideas. I spent a lot of time. I'd sort of think of for me, writing this book was it was sitting in front of the computer. And then there was like, I would do it often when I exercise of like, how can I chop down the concepts to make it simpler.
Tell me about that.
My own personal process is I will wake up early in the morning. I always usually work better in the morning. I get like 3 or 4 good hours in me, and then I'm probably not creative anymore. And we'll write and, in front of a computer and actually do the writing. And then I often will find that there's sort of a naughty conceptual problem, like a KNO, naughty, sorry.
You're being so naughty today. You're so hard to work with.
There's like a naughty conceptual problem. And then that's for me, like I had a lot of these, like what was the, there are particular sections at the end. There's one on finance and there's one on social networking. And like those were just killed me. Like I probably did 50 iterations of those and just kept thinking over and over of like, what's the right way to frame this? What's the right, and so, yeah, would go and like whenever things feel jumbled, I always feel like I'm missing the right distinction, the right concept. And like, once I figure out the right concept, that will, right, it will all just sort of fall into place. Like, I sort of feel like everything should be simple. And if it's not simple, then I haven't thought about it enough, right?
Yeah. Well, I found a few things. So something I see all the time is that I'll be writing, but my fingertips are moving, but I don't have that same intentionality. And when there's that muck that's coming out of me, I often don't know the core thing that I'm trying to say. So when you say, come for the tool, stay for the network, there's a lot of things that you've just been given.
Yep.
You've been given a structure. The beginning will be come for the tool. The second will be stay for the network. You'll probably have a few examples there that show what's going on. And then when you edit, if something doesn't go back to that one sentence, you're like, I'm going to cut this.
Yeah, that's right.
And I find over and over again, what'll happen is I'll be super stuck and I'll talk to a friend and I'll explain it to them. And then they'll say, come for the tool, stay for the network. Yeah. That's what you're trying to say. And often I get it Socratically, what that one-liner is, what that answer is.
Yeah, speaking to people is going out. Often for me, the log jam will break of just like going out, having conversations, like getting out of your element. Time fixes it. But I always feel like, if it's not super simple, like I haven't thought about it enough, right? It has to be so broken down. But going back to if you want to finish on the process, so I went through, had 20 people, did the remove the crutch words, remove the adjectives, steel man the counter arguments, all of that. Had 20 people critique it, went through all of it. I took 2 weeks off of work. We have this break in the summer, and I just took it off and rented a house on the beach and just literally all alone for 2 weeks worked on that, going through all the comments. And then I thought, okay, this is getting good. And then I went and did a fresh read, and I was horrified because I was basically I had gone through and done all these comments, but now the structure was all ruined, right? Because it was just I had just sort of layered over all of these different things, and it was just a mess. And I was like, how could I? And I was actually kind of scary in a way, not scary, but it was just a little bit disturbing because I was just so far, I thought I was getting close to being done. And I was like, wow, this is really just not structured right. So then I had to do.
I hate that moment.
So that
the word that came to mind was despair. I've had moments when I thought I was really close and somebody says, hey man, it's just not good enough. And there's something about restructuring. What I find so interesting about structure is, have you heard the line about painters that
the turpentine?
Yeah, exactly. People who are outside of painting, they talk about, form and function, and people who are inside of the world of painting, they talk about where to find cheap turpentine. I think it's such a good line. And I think it's the same thing with writing, that writers always talk about structure, because as writers, we know that once you find the structure, the content, it actually just follows from that. And a really good structure is invisible. Yeah. A really good structure seems obvious, but I know that is the work. And to go back to this moment, the reason I feel a sense of despair is because I know how much work just comes back to just taking this, putting it here, taking that, putting it there. And then I can only even imagine in a project the size of a book, trying to basically know what state the reader has in their mind.
That's the hardest part. The hardest part for me, there's a million hard parts of a book, but yes, they're now on page 190. This is the average reader. What are they thinking? What's clear to them? What isn't? And so the other thing I found, is that having the 20 readers was, of course, invaluable because they just know stuff I don't know and, would just say smart things. But also, the way I've come to think of it, we were talking before the video about George Saunders, this book,
A Swim in the Pond.
Swim in the Pond. That was a great book. I read that after I wrote the book. I've been on a reading binge more than I've ever been since I finished the book about 4 months ago. I think partly because I appreciate books more. I've always liked books, and I also read a bunch of books about writing. He has some line in there about how I'm going to butcher it, but it essentially you kind of think of it as you're reading the book, and then in your mind it's really an interactive process, right? You're the reader is now processing what you wrote, but then also thinking of counter arguments. And if I, the writer, don't, if you read 5 paragraphs and you thought of 5 counter arguments and I don't address them, at some point you're going to stop reading the book. You're going to be like, this person's just off on a different branch of the world, right? And so how do you know kind of what branch they're going down and what they're thinking, right? I think that you can try to guess and anticipate it, but I don't think there's any substitute for having readers who are good readers who give you that feedback. And they'd be like, well, this is not what I don't get this. I'm thinking this. Here's my counter argument. So that was the other thing of having, and maybe 20s, I don't know if 20 is the right number. At some point it becomes impossible, unwieldy, and how many people can you really ask to to do close reads
amongst editors, right?
There's probably a power law.
There's different levels to this. There's the copy edits, and then there's, hey, I think that you can rejigger this. But every now and then I'll get a comment where somebody can see the most fundamental layer of what it is that I'm saying. They can see that I'm saying something that I haven't even explicitly said. And they can say, if you can take this and change it to that, everything else falls into place.
That's great. Yeah.
And those editors are
big
hard
kind of unlock,
to find.
Yeah.
Hard to find.
Yeah. That's interesting. So that was, anyway, so then I had to refactor it, and that was the next kind of 4 months. And then there was just all the details. I can't believe how many details, how much time. There's just acknowledgments and this and that and the index and we have, it's a nice index. The Random House did a lot of that. The end notes, checking the end notes. I hired an outside separate fact checker.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah. So this great woman, Maura Fox, who has sort of experience at a bunch of magazines and things, and look, this is a controversial topic. I know that it's going to get fact checked by the world. And so I said, look, let me just go go crazy, no limits, just like find any mistakes in the book. And as a byproduct, she did. And she found, I lived through a lot of this. So like it was directionally correct. But of course, I did some dates wrong. I had some attributions wrong, and she fixed all that and corrected me. But also she found some great, as a byproduct, found some great quotes. So it's called Rewrite Own. And in the 2000s, there was this thing, people call it the Web 2 movement, of sort of the social media movement. But actually at the time, it was actually called the Read Write movement. It was a very common thing. Read Write is not my phrase. But I wasn't, and I sort of wanted to say that and sort of say, hey, like this Read Write Own, I'm adding the own to it, but I'm not making up the Read Write. Like that history of like the Read era, the Read Write era, that is a common take on it. And like Maura found this great quote from this very popular blog called the Read Write Web that was like the manifesto of that web that I put in the book, which sort of, as an example. So hired an outside fact checker and researcher. I had some help with like the charts and stuff. That all took forever. That's all been very carefully vetted. There was some data and other things in there. So anyways, just graphic design. The book is quite a process for those who are watching, if they're thinking about going through it. But
I want to go back to a moment early in your life when I think that you realized the benefits of writing. You wrote a letter to Alan Kay.
Oh, did I have that in my blog?
I don't know where I found that.
Yeah, I think maybe I blogged about that once. That's funny.
Yeah, but that seems to have really influenced you. I forget how I found it.
When I was a kid, I used to write letters, and I don't know why, but I used to like write physical letters. This is, it was the 80s, so it was before like the internet or whatever, or the internet existed, but not in its modern form. And I was living in Ohio, in a small town, in Springfield, Ohio, it's like relatively small town. And was really into computers, and I got, and I guess it was an Apple at the time. I think it was Atari or Apple, and had and it was sort of early, very pre-browser and everything. And so I had no computer manual, so I wrote a letter to, I think it was to Apple, and I said I am this whatever. I guess I was 11-year-old kid or something in Ohio, and I'm really into programming, and I don't have. At the time. I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in this, but at the time there was like computers were like this mystical thing because you couldn't go Google it, you couldn't do whatever, and like it literally like there was the Apple II had like 64K of memory, and each memory location would have different things it would do, and almost nobody would know what they do unless you had like the original manual. So yeah, I wrote a letter, and I got a letter back I wish I saved it, from Alan Kay, who's a famous researcher, and they sent me this giant box of books. It was where did you see that? That's funny. I must have put that in a blog post somewhere, but I
don't know.
It's actually remarkable. I think people could still do it today. Like, I think if you just write nice letters to the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, I bet you will get a 99% success rate. In fact, I know you will, because I will tell you now, I'll skip ahead to the secret, which is they all have offices of the CEO who basically will, if a kid writes a letter, they will say, do it. And it works partly, they all will respond because it actually doesn't happen that often. They get like these angry, like crazed letters, and they just send those off to legal or something. But
right.
Like, if you write a friendly, respectful letter, particularly if you're a kid, cute kid who might end up in the press, like they will give you a tour of a 737.
Yeah. All right, Chris, what I want to do is I want to switch the focus of this conversation into business models for writers. But I want to start off with why you chose to write a book. Yeah. You have a tweet from 2014 where you say most business books exist because the book format still has cultural gravitas. Bloggers don't appear on Charlie Rose or get reviewed by the New York Times.
And I think that's true, and that's part of why I wrote a book. And I also say, by the way, as a funny aside, I think people, because I run a fund and I'm a business person, people expect this to be kind of a book that's like, well, one is a lot of people have said, did you write the book? And in fact, I've gotten from entrepreneurs, they just assume you don't write the book, because most people that do what I do don't write books. Number one. And then number two, if you do write a book, it's like 7 ways to be successful or something. It's sort of a, how-to sort of type of thing. And it's definitely not that type of book. So anyway, so that's just a kind of a funny aside, but and I do think most business books are not good for that reason. Look, the problem with business books generally is they aren't written by the person, or if they are written by the person, most business people are under a lot of constraints about what they can say. So like I've read a lot of business books, and like I won't name names, but like there was one business book that when I was talking to publishers and agents were like, oh, you should read this business book. And so, we think this is a good one. And I read it and I was like, I can see why they think it's good. It sold a lot of copies, but it's fake. And I know it's fake because it was a book about a bunch of projects that the person worked on. And I've been involved with a bunch of projects in my life. And I will tell you something about projects. When you have a project that involves, let's say 100 people that's creating something, they're creating like a startup or, creative project, they are shit shows. Every project that involves a lot of people over a long period of time is a giant series of shit shows, clusterfucks, like whatever, that maybe work out in the end. Okay?
I can confirm.
And so if you read a book that is about somebody's creative processes and it doesn't involve that, it's not authentic. Okay. And so like one book that would be fun to write would be a book about like startups and what actually happened. The problem with that book is I can't write that book, right? And no business person probably can unless they're quitting the industry forever, because it's going to be a bunch of like, there's just a bunch of stuff that's not my place to say of like stuff that went wrong. Right. And it really isn't my place. Maybe you could write like I don't know. Like what
Mark Andreessen said about this? I asked him, what is a book that you would want to write? And he goes, I'd write a Ramona Clef. And I'm like, I don't know what a Ramona Clef is.
That's a book in disguise.
And he goes, so it's a book in disguise where everything that happened actually happened, but all the names, dates, and events have been changed.
Yeah. I think that would probably be the honest business book, right? Or you kind of go like I did and sort of go up a level of abstraction and I don't go into all the messy details, but there's a lot of stuff I learned from those messy details, right? And so I think I just do think a lot of business books for that, either they can't tell the truth because they're under constraints, or they don't really write the book. And so that was what I think part of what my tweet was referring to, is like, well, just skip all of that stuff and generally my view has been write a blog post. Now, the advantage of a book and why I wrote a book is a couple of fold. One, I really felt strongly in this case that what I say in this book simply could not be compressed any further. Like, I believe this is a highly compressed, it's 213 pages main text, I think that's right, roughly, that goes through the history of the internet, explains blockchains, explains, gives a bunch of future applications, covers a lot of ground. I hope it does it in a way that's understandable, but it's compressed. Like, it can't be made into a series of blog posts, number one. Number two, yes, to the point of that tweet, to agree with that, books have this ability, I think, to cross over into a different kind of realm of, a book is in some way, like, there's different ways to look at a book, right? It's obviously there's the physical book and the things written in it, but it's also kind of a container for a meme container.
I was going to say a normie IPO.
Yeah, it's a meme delivery vehicle, right? It's like a CD delivers a movie, it delivers a meme. Yeah. And you just see like books, like, actually I was really shocked and kind of depressed to look at the book sales figures when I started this project. The books just don't sell. I'm used to the internet. Like, we have small some hobbyist website will get 1 million views, and like, I think the best-selling kind of non-romance, non-fiction book last year was like 400,000 copies or
should have written a romance novel.
Yeah, apparently romantasy is what I'm told is the thing. It's fantasy meets romance is like the hot thing. So if this read right on doesn't work out, that's but that said, like, if you think about it, how many books have there been that have had profound, like, the ideas have spread very far. Now, number one. I think the other really cool thing about books is did you see the new Spider-Verse movie, the Spider-Verse 2?
No.
I'm not a big superhero movie. But
I've checked out of the Marvel stuff.
No, it's not Marvel. No, it's the cartoon. This is cartoon ones. It's totally different. I agree. I don't watch Marvel. But the Spider-Verse is like this very creative cartoon thing. Anyways, but they have this idea of, they call it, so it's like this multiverse and the world splits, but there's this thing called canon event. And a canon event is this event that's so important in your life that in any version of the multiverse, it persists. So like in Spider-Man's case, getting bit by the spider, that has to be sort of essential to his character and everything. Anyway, so canon, and the reason I mentioned it is now become a thing on TikTok. People talk about their canon events. Okay, it's like an internet meme now. Okay, so anyways, the other thing I think is interesting about books is that they can create canon events, right? So maybe only this will, I don't know how many people will read this book. Maybe it's, not as many as read my blog posts or something, because it's just the nature of books. But I think that what I hope is 10 years from now, there'll be somebody comes up to me and like, you know, they created some great product or idea or something, invention, and they say, you know, that book was a canon event. Like books can be canon, they can have that kind of impact on a relatively small group of people. So I think there's two. I think one is they can propagate memes in a way that and just sort of affect the cultural zeitgeist, just introduce ideas to the sort of broader world in a way that blog posts and podcasts, it's much harder for them to. And then two, I think on specific people, like I think about my own life, like my career, my life was changed by various books. Like the reason I got into philosophy was a bunch of sort of gateway books that were kind of computer science meets philosophy. And like, I think that's true with a lot of people that like, so that to me is the power of a book. And I wanted to do that. But ultimately for me, it was this idea that, I felt, well, let me say one other thing, which is I have worked in technology for 25 years. And generally, I've found there's some gap between what I see as, quote, what I view as the reality of a technology and the public perception of it. However, the gap is not that wide. In this case, I think the gap is just absolutely massive. So there's this, crypto is like scams and casinos and FTX. And I view, and that exists, and I think that's a perversion, kind of co-option of the real technology. I view blockchains as the most important invention for potentially returning the internet to its original ideals. Okay, so I view it just the gap between the two is so wide that kind of like, look, when a lot of bad stuff happened, like the FTX crash and just a bunch of like scams and other things like 2 years ago, like that was upsetting. And at first I was like, this is depressing, like this gap between like what I see as like this very important new way to build networks and that have all of these positive benefits. That's and the perception of it as scams and all this other speculation. And at first I kind of felt sorry for myself or whatever, depressed about it. And then I said, you know what, this is actually the greatest opportunity in my career to write a book. Like, what if you could close that gap? And actually, after writing this book, I was like, that was kind of fun. Maybe I should write another book. And then every idea I think of, like, they're okay. But I'm like, wow, that was a really, like, there's nothing I see that has that kind of gap. Like, there is such a gap. I basically guarantee you that anyone who reads this will have it is a different view of the internet than they're told. It's a different history of the internet. I think it's a completely coherent and fully argued view of it. I'm not expecting everyone to, like, read it and immediately be converted. But I do think they will come away from it saying, okay, that is I think an honest read is that is a well thought out, different view of the world.
I think that this is a good teaching moment because I spend so much time talking to people who come to me and say, what should I write about? What should I write about? And Bezos has a line where he says, your profit margin is my opportunity. Your margin is my opportunity. And what I always say back to people is their ignorance is your opportunity.
Yeah. What's the most misunderstood thing?
What is the most misunderstood thing? What is something that you look at the world and you say, people think this, that is wrong. I know why. Yeah. And I'm going to argue for something else.
I think it's great advice. And that's how I felt. Like I felt with this book, I mean, I can't tell you how clear, I mean, obviously I wrote the book, but even before I wrote the book, like I spent my whole career doing this. So, I mean, obviously, but like, I am like looking at this, thing in front of me and I see it so clearly. And it's just like everything I see in the world is through this lens and the internet. I mean, people spend 7 hours a day on the internet. I spend at least that many hours. Like it's a big part of my life. And I view it through a certain lens. And very few other people view it through that lens. And I feel like it's a fully worked out, full worldview, fully defensible, kind of lens on the world. And it's just like, it kind of drives you crazy in a way, because it's like,
of course it does.
Why doesn't everyone else see it that way? And so I agree with you, to your point. Like, I mean, now there's an interesting follow-up, right? Which is, and actually, I actually, to be totally candid, like until I wrote the book, part of the reason I wrote the book was to test myself. I'm like, I feel like this is just like the world's wrong and I'm right? Like, is everyone crazy or am I crazy? But the way to really prove it is to write it out in a way that, like, by the way, Bezos talks about this too, and I think he's right. Like, why is there no PowerPoints at Amazon? Because PowerPoints let you kind of lead or skip over sloppy thinking. Writing, one of the many virtues of writing, right, is it forces you to see all the steps to show your work. And so for me, partly also the book was a personal test of like, am I crazy? Like my view of the world is so different than most people's. Am I crazy or are they crazy? All right. And I'm like, I will tell you now, I don't believe I'm crazy. So like, I've now written it out in a very, like detailed step-by-step kind of argument kind of way. And so part of it was a test of that. But I think that advice you give is great. I think kind of what is your, it's Peter Thiel has this concept of what is your secret.
Totally.
Are you familiar with this? So like the basic idea is, I have a startup idea. My startup idea is I'm going to create an iPhone with longer battery life. Okay, that's not a good startup idea. Why? Because it's not a secret. Because everyone knows that's a useful product. Apple is probably got a lab of 10,000 people, or 1,000 people working with batteries and making iPhones with longer lives, right? Most startups involve something kind of counterintuitive. There's something, that's what he means by a secret, right? It turns out people do want to all get on the internet and socialize and do this. And this is sort of Mark Zuckerberg's secret, right? At the time, it didn't seem like an obvious behavior. Bill Gates, that at the time, hardware was the business model of computer companies. Everyone knew that the way you make money is you sell machines. He said, no, I'm going to make money selling software. That was contrarian, right? And Peter Thiel would also say, I think he talked about an earned secret. So like you don't just come to the secret, just like walking on the street and discover that like people want software, right? Like it came through, like he was programming, he was building stuff, he was seeing it, and he was sort of understanding, he sort of, it takes time. And to your point, I think that I'm not sure that's the only reason to write a book, but I think certainly one good way to think about what to write about is like sort of what is your earned secret, right? What do you know about the world? I think I'm just rephrasing what you said, by the way. I think is it that that's counterintuitive, that's different, that for some reason, because of my life experience, I know and is not obvious to everybody else.
Of course. You were talking earlier about almost lamenting the way that the internet has not turned out to be this utopian ideal in the way that we thought. And for me, the one that just breaks my heart is that there aren't as many profitable niches as I think there could be, especially in the intellectual sphere.
Yeah.
The platonic ideal of the internet that I want to spend at least the next decade fostering is fixing this problem where we have all these domain experts who haven't shared their ideas, written them, and published them for other people to know and understand. Mm. And then it doesn't just help the general public, their readers, it also helps the domain experts. And what I want to be helping people do is, I call this your core idea. Take those domain experts who've been working in a field for 20 years. What is that idea that you know is true? What is that story that you need to tell, that message that you need to spread? Now let me help you find, polish, distribute that core idea. Because when we talk about what the internet could be, what the internet should be, what the internet will be, if we get this right, will be this explosion of information because people are sharing their domain expertise.
Why aren't they doing that today in your view?
A few reasons. First of all, I think writing is a very good way to do it, and writing is hard. You were talking earlier about these people run businesses. They have a bunch of demand on their time. I think that's the first thing. The second is what I call a cold start distribution problem, which I'm getting excited about solving, which is, say that I take a VP at a relatively successful corporation, and they've been working at this company for 25 years. They're an expert in, let's call it telco. How does she write a great piece? And she needs support with that, and we can give her that at rite of passage. But then the second thing is, how does she get that idea out there?
Yeah.
She doesn't have an audience. She doesn't have reach. But what I want to figure out how to do is, how can I take anybody and get them to write one article that changes their life? And I think that the distribution problem is challenging. And a lot of the narrative from the last decade or so, which I actually think was right, is you need to write consistently.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to think, how do I do it with one piece?
Yeah. Yeah, there is this rich get richer problem, right? And the consistency is critical to building up the audience, because if you just pop out one great article, where are you going to place it? Maybe you get it in an existing publication, but otherwise, if you have no social media following, how do you get it out there? how do people know about it? It's very hard.
And I talk to so many smart people. I can't believe it. People who, listeners, you would know their names, and we respect the heck out of them. And I talk to them and they're like, oh, I'm not a good writer. I can't write. And I'm like, explain to me why you can't write. And they'll mention A or B. I'm like, look, I've heard that 100 times. And so not just giving them answers, but then trying to give them a proper tactical solution, because writing is the scary thing. I think it begins when we're in elementary school. It extends into middle school. It's the scary thing. People are afraid to look bad in public. And I think that that's why we have this inefficiency in the world right now.
It's hard to just, I think, it takes a lot of time. It's the folks you're discussing are busy people with families and careers, and like to sit down and structure your day around it, right? I mean, it really requires new habits in many ways. I had to kind of change to write the book. I had to change a lot of my lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, you credit your wife at the end, and you say, thank you.
Oh, yeah, my wife's a lot, just incredibly supportive, just exercise, getting to bed early, getting up, whatever, just colleagues picking up slack. Like, it's hard to do. It's very hard to do. And not everyone has the ability to do those things and has that situation. So,
yeah, well, this is the problem that I'm devoting my career to solving.
I think it's a worthy problem.
Thank you. Talk to me about 1,000 True Fans.
Yeah.
And you have a bit of a critique in the book, basically saying it hasn't quite panned out like we thought.
This is a famous blog post by Kevin Kelly, who's a brilliant author, co-founder of Wired Magazine, kind of a tech optimist. Actually, he's one of the blurbs on my back of the book, on the final book, which I was very excited about, because I sent him the book, and he's actually pro-tech, but he's actually been a longtime blockchain skeptic. And the quote on the back of the book that he gave me, and I sent him the book, and I don't know. I mean, I know him, but he's not going to say nice things if he doesn't believe them. And he said it changed his mind. He said, and that was, and so that's actually, I put that on the back of the book, but about blockchains, and made him positive on it. So that was great. But anyways, so he's got a lot of great blog posts. I highly encourage, I think it's kk.org. He's like an old school blog. He's still blogging, and he has a new book out too, by the way, on like life advice. I just got,
we interviewed him here. So,
oh, you did? Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I love Kevin Kelly.
Yeah, me too.
And so, so he has this great blog post, 1,000 True Fans. And the idea was, this is still in the kind of optimistic year. I think he wrote it in the early 2000s, but it was before the kind of what I think of as the reversal, where the internet got taken over by these companies. And it was still kind of this open internet utopian dream. And the idea was the internet would change how creators can make a living. And specifically that instead of needing kind of mass market distribution, so you think about pre-internet music, you had to get, you either got a record deal and on the radio and you were sort of a pop star, or you were broke, right? Or something. I mean, it's sort of, maybe not, maybe there's some was in the middle, but for the most part, that was kind of the game, right? You had to get this mass audience. And so a lot of the early promise of the internet was that this would change it, and you could have all of these sort of millions and millions of niches. The key idea is when you remove all of these layers of intermediaries, you just dramatically change the economics of creators. Like, I think I'm actually putting all the money from the book back into the book marketing, but I believe I get 15%. I think that's what book authors get. I'm pretty sure it's 15%. It's nice, but 85% goes somewhere else. Like, right? I mean, like, there's a lot of intermediaries. And I'm not begrudging that. Like, the retailer should get paid and the publisher should get paid. But like, that's the way that most creative economics work. And so that was the promise. That was the sort of original promise of the internet. Was that you could go direct, and then that would just dramatically transform the economics, and you wouldn't need to go mass market. And what that meant, and so I think that is very important, not just because creators should make money and that would let them make money, right? But also that means you could get kind of the world you're describing, right? Like, here's my argument to you: is a world you're describing where, I'm an expert on airplane propellers. Like, why isn't that person sharing the information? Part of it is the logic of mass. Of mass audiences, right? Like today, because like how many people are actually interested in this, whatever, pick your niche, how many people, and the answer is often not that many people. Maybe it is only thousands, right? And so, a lot of this comes down to the internet structure. Like, what if we had an internet where we didn't have these intermediaries? So to Kevin Kelly, going back, Kevin Kelly wrote this post. This is where people like me and everyone thought this was headed. We're going to have this internet without intermediaries. Everyone's going to have a direct relationship with their audience. And that will in turn have the secondary benefit of everyone, if you can have this millions of niches and people can make a living serving a niche instead of serving a mass audience, right? And that would have this additional kind of nice human flourishing aspect that everyone could just do. If you're interested in some weird niche, you can just go do it. And you don't have to sacrifice your creative ideals to sort of sell out, right? You can stay an indie band. You don't have to go try to be you can stay the cool indie band in Brooklyn, and you don't have to go try to be, playing stadiums in Milwaukee, right? And that just seemed not only like a better economic future, but a better cultural future. And that was what was so exciting about that idea. And I think that idea got hijacked by these big tech companies who basically, the Facebooks and the Twitters, reinserted themselves as intermediaries. We actually have now a situation that I would argue is even worse than the pre-internet era, because in the pre-internet era, like I just said with the book, I get 15%. On Facebook, you get 0%, right? They make $150 billion a year running ads, and they share none of that with the creators. Like, it's really almost unprecedented in business history that you have intermediaries that don't share any of the revenue. It varies. Like YouTube shares 45%. Spotify takes 30%. The labels take another huge chunk. So like each one varies, but like the main social networks take 100%. This is all, I walk through this all in detail in the book, but that I think as a result has created a whole bunch of negative effects. One is economic, but there are also kind of cultural ones. What is it now? Now, what do you try to do on these networks? Well, you try to go get a mass audience. You try to appeal to lowest common denominator. I've heard you talk about recency bias. The algorithms favor freshness and newness and liveness and sensationalism.
So angry.
And
that's the thing, out of all the things in the world, that is the thing I'm the most angry
and so
about.
The algorithms are just like whatever the algorithm favors. And by the way, these algorithms are opaque. They don't disclose what they do. Who knows what they do? They do things. I know that, for example, for a fact that what TikTok is doing right now is so TikTok grew with a few major kind of creators who, got hundreds of millions of followers, and TikTok doesn't like that. They don't want to be dependent on a few big creators, because then those creators can switch. And so what they do is they then turn the dial to like support some new creators and downturn. So there's always these sort of Oz behind the curtain, turning the dials on these social networks, deciding kind of who wins and who loses, who gets reach, and all these kind of manipulation goes on. And so I just think that we've really gotten off path from where the internet could be, and where kind of Kevin Kelly envisioned it.
And you talk about the death of the middle. So if I'm thinking about, literally, I am a creator and I want to make good money as a creator. I don't want to sacrifice income, at least. I don't need to be a billionaire, but I don't want to sacrifice income meaningfully. I don't want to, pick table scraps, in my wooden shack or something. How should I be thinking about my career as a creator in terms of where the internet is evolving?
Yeah, that's a multi-layered question. So first, let me talk about death of the middle. So death of the middle is a common pattern in technology. I'll give you an example, retail. Okay, so with the rise of the internet, so before the internet, you had these big department stores like JCPenney and Sears, and you also had, of course, like more like, high-end boutique outlets and things like this, and Walmart. And what the internet did is it sort of killed the middle, death of the middle. And so what that means is JCPenney and Sears and all the kind of Kmarts, if they didn't go bankrupt, they're soon to go bankrupt. And what it rewarded was the two edges, the people call also barbell. Hyperscale, Amazon and Walmart, why they succeed in that world, right? Because they are just the most cost effective. They can invest in robotic factories and all these other kinds of things they do. And on the other end of the spectrum, like the ultra, like high touch boutiques, so like Gucci, LVMH. And by the way, not a coincidence that I think the two richest people in the world or two of the top five, Jeff Bezos on one hand and Pierre Arnault on the other, who's LVMH, which is a roll-up of, it's a private equity style roll-up of those high-end boutiques, right? So those two ends of the spectrum worked well. Like, by the way, I think this happened in media with, the book industry has done, like I asked my friends in the book industry when I wrote this book, and like, how's the book industry doing? They're like, it's pretty good. It's actually stayed pretty much fine throughout the internet. Like the internet, it changes, there's book talk and how people find books, but it hasn't dramatic. I think the revenues of the book industry have grown a little bit or flat. Like it hasn't disrupted the book industry, right? Whereas, and then, so what succeeded in the internet era? It's on the one hand, very long form books. On the other hand, the opposite end of the spectrum, like 20-second TikToks. and 140 or now I guess 400 character tweets or whatever, right? Like the two ends of the spectrum. What has died, we were talking about earlier, unfortunately, is sort of in the middle. Like, right, it's blogging, it's certainly magazines. Sports Illustrated just announced they're shutting down. Like, yeah. So like, or they laid everybody off. Yeah, no, I mean, so like that industry outside of maybe the high photo quality ones like Vogue is basically decimated, like a lot of the media. So that's the middle, like middle length, middle quality, middle investment. Like you can define it, there's nuances to how you define it. And so, by the way, I think a simple model, I'm not saying this is right, but it's a first guess is like, what will AI do to writing? Like ChatGPT, probably death of the middle, right? Which means if you're super high end, if you're, a great author or, a great publication or one other kind of thing, you're probably okay. I mean, I don't think people buy, high end fiction for, they buy it for the writing, but they also, it's important to them that it's written by a person and that there's a human connection.
There's a status thing too. Hey, because when you go to the party, you can't go to an Upper East Side party and say
there's a community thing. Yeah. And like, look, people talk about this too, like with chess, an interesting case study, right? Chess, I think computers got better than computers got better than humans in chess, 20 years ago or something. Chess is more popular than ever on the internet by a significant margin. And people like watching other people play chess, and they don't watch computers play chess, right? So they're not watching for the pure quality of the game, because if you did, you just watch AIs fight each other, play each other. They're watching for, it's the whole thing. Humans like humans, right? And I think that will remain the case with art. I think that it will mean that it becomes more important that you lean into the community, the status, the humanity of it, right? Like that you really, like that you're reading this person writing about it, like that matters.
Yeah, I'll tell you sort of when... I had a smart entrepreneur ask me the other day, he said, AI could really hurt your business, and I've been working on this piece with you. We're working on one together. And he said, how should I be thinking about this piece differently in terms of AI's round? And I said, here's what it is. You got to focus on two things. First, you need a great insight. And one way to define a great insight is that AI disagrees with you. That AI, as a sort of consensus calibration mechanism.
Yeah, you think of AI as the average of the internet in a way. Yeah.
AI thinks you're wrong. So we'll use that as a starting point. So we can use AI for a definition there. So you need a great insight. And then, like your book, it needs to be supported by firsthand knowledge, deep firsthand knowledge where you can write about that knowledge and it comes through that you've really been there through the depth of your observations, the clarity of your thinking. And then what I would say that you have to do, I love what you just said, humans like humans. What then you got to do is layer on a personal component. I don't just want to hear your data, your insights, all that stuff. I want to hear a personal story. When you were in the boardroom, when you were founding your company, when you sold your product to Whole Foods for the first time, what was that like? How did that feel? And if you can think through that deep insight that AI disagrees with you on, simple idea, your core idea, one line, and you can layer personal stories with that and that human-to-human connection, I think you're good to go.
I think that's also I agree with you, and I think it's also closely connected to what I was calling earlier authenticity.
Yep.
Because I think authenticity too, like your humanity shows through, and people are I think especially modern people who are just consuming information all day, I think they're very good at detecting inauthentic things. I don't know, maybe I'm overestimating,
I agree.
But I think people can just immediately tell, is that authentic or is that like, I'm being sold something?
Yep.
And so I think that's part of it too, is that like part of the showing your humanity is being authentic and vulnerable and complex and nuanced and multifaceted and all the other kinds of things, right? And personal and telling stories. And so I think just the first pass, not having, it's a crystal ball, is that things like AI is going to be important. It's going to grow. It's a big deal. We are probably at a kind of a year ago was an inflection point. Like the thing about it is, like, we already know these models are good, but we also know that when you just basically throw more data and compute at these models, which is happening, they get better. And so there's what they call the scaling laws, which is that that the sort of the IQ of the system goes up with more GPUs and data, and at some point everything asymptotes, everything in the world basically at some point has some point at which there's diminishing returns, but we're not at that point yet. And so that will get better. That will change writing. I think there's some really interesting stuff, like there's work being done where it's sort of co-pilot work, meaning, and I think this might be very likely in the future, where you can have a very smart kind of AI assistant writing that will help people. It will recall notes, recall things you read, suggest relevant things.
Recall state. We're talking about state. How great would it be if, as you're doing your rewrite, the AI can track the state of what the reader knows?
Yes, this concept has already been explained.
That would have been so useful.
That would have been incredibly useful. I would have just liked something that's like a more advanced, like, hey, you're using some passive voice, like just reminders of writing. Hey, maybe this clause should go over here. Just like a smart editor. Like, I would think that would be really useful. I actually found, I tried a little bit of ChatGPT in the book. It's funny, I sent to a friend of mine, he's like, I had never thought to do this. He said, I ran it, what's it called, Zero GPT? I ran your thing through a GPT checker and you scored 0% or 1%, like meaning...
Unplagiarism.
It was, yes, well, it wasn't plagiarism. It wasn't written by a machine. And apparently it was clear to my nerd friend that it was not written by a machine, which I was like, that's good, because it wasn't. But I did of course play around with ChatGPT during it, and I found it like, it's amazing technology, is very good, but it was not my voice and it was not of the quality I wanted to write. But it will get much better. But I think this Copilot kind of use case is really exciting, and I think to your vision of getting more people to write, I think that could be a very powerful way to do that. I think I would much rather see the Copilot vision, because I feel like if it's just written by ChatGPT and it's more like people, like it's gonna get really it's not gonna be good. Like, I don't think. I think you need to we need to find the right balance between the things machines are good at, which is like you said, like recalling, did you already say this? Helping you with tactical rewrites. But I think if you have the machine do all of it, you're going to, at least for the near term, maybe the machines will get so magical at some point, but at least in the near term, you're going to lose the voice and the humanity of it.
Well, the other thing that I would love to think through with you, and we could probably end the podcast here, is the thing that I would like to see changed about the internet is no more recency bias in the way that we have it now. We have the dial up really high, and I would like to see places on the internet where we don't. For example, I would love to see a Twitter feed that shows me basically all the tweets that I've liked and bookmarked, and they just repopulate, space repetition. Why am I not seeing a great tweet from you from 2013, somebody else from 2016?
Yeah, I guess the question is, like, the pushback to that argument would, like, is it the systems or is it the people? Like, in other words, like, I'm just giving you the steel manning the counter argument, which is that that maybe, look, we tried that, maybe Facebook would say, and it just turns out people want the new stuff,
And what I would say back is that the architecture, it might be true that it is what people want, but to me, it's what people want in the same way that people want sugar and processed foods.
Yeah, I see.
And yes, this to me is a big problem with markets, that what people want in the now is not the same as what people want over the long time horizon of their life, which is not the same as what's good for society. And I agree, it is what gets engagement. There's no doubt about it. But to the reason why this is so important is, if we can create a place where people can consistently find great works, then people can benefit from a really well-written piece over a much longer time horizon. So if someone writes a great Twitter thread at this point, it's only going to be shown in the feed for 48 hours. What does it look like to have something shown in the feed for the next 10 years? Because it's worthy of that. It's worthy of being shared and being read repeatedly.
I mean, like, I would argue part of this is sort of the topic of my book, which is, so that, part of my theme is that the other network design. So if you look at the web is a protocol network. Like, the web doesn't have the same recency bias. That if you go look at the usage of websites, it's much more uniformly distributed across the age of the website than the people reading on Twitter or something. So a lot of this is that you have these companies controlling these networks, and they are optimizing for things that aren't just, that are basically, they're optimizing for profit motives. And so they're optimizing for quick engagement and kind of sugar highs, as you will. So I do think that is part of the problem. I think it's complex, though, because I think it's also like, look, I think part of the problem is, like, look, if you look at people's diets, like when they first introduced sugary cereal, I grew up like just everyone ate sugary cereal, like, and then over time, people realized there were trade-offs. And I do think we're in this period where, like, social media just kind of it's been around for 15 years, but really only as a mass medium for less than a decade, really, that the masses got on. And so everyone rushes in and grabs a sugar cereal. And then I think over time, what I hope is that as a society, we kind of come back and find a balance, right? And sort of say, okay, like in the same way, now there's this sort of big, at least in the tech world I'm in, there's the whole kind of Andrew Huberman, like
optimization.
Yeah, optimization, like eat certain diets. Like I'm like this, I'm kind of like high protein and don't drink and all these other things. And like a lot of my friends are like that. And so, it's not like always fun, like to do that. But over time, you realize, wait a second, this is not a sustainable way to live. And I think that people might get to that point too with social media and things. I do. Like I have a rule for myself that I have to read 50 pages of a book every day. And that part of this is to not use social media and to get off the computer and, just always spend time on sort of, I think of books as kind of the protein of the mind, and social media in many cases the sugar. And if I don't go and sort of have rules around that, and I often find like the first 5 minutes, sometimes I'm distracted and everything else, but then I get in the flow. And actually the reason I have the 50-page rule is that often after reading 50 pages, I want to read another 50 pages. So it's like, it's enough time to force me to kind of get off the sugar.
I love that.
Yeah. And so I think people will, my hope is that people will grapple with these things over time and find the better balance. We're out of whack right now, I think.
Well, I think we can close here because I thought this was a hilarious anecdote. And this is a benefit of printed books, is I remembered where on the page I read it. So I could look at my little stickies and it basically could narrow down. But I thought this was really interesting, that discovering the real powers of a new medium takes time. When Johannes Gutenberg, inventor of the movable type printing press, published his namesake Bible in the 15th century, he made it look like a handmade manuscript copy. Who could imagine anything else? And it was only about 150 years later that we ended up realizing that the printing press would lead to science and scientific and political revolution.
And that's part of a passage talking about generally whenever there's new media, there's a transition period. And I call it sort of, the distinction I use, it comes from Steve Jobs, is skeuomorphic versus native technologies. And so, like the early films around 1905 or something.
With the plays.
They took plays and they filmed them, and then they, and then a whole bunch of technology sort of developed. The early internet was like, if you look at the 90s internet, it was like magazine brochures and catalogs, and it was all sort of taking these ideas from the offline world because people hadn't fully figured it out yet. And books were like that too. So yeah, the original books looked like monk scribes, and the use case was, what else would you do with it but the Bible? And of course later on you have, fast forward, you have all these guys writing, anonymous letters during the American Revolution and all the other kinds of, things that happened, dramatic things that happened through the written word in the next couple hundred years. So.
And books like this, hey, Chris, congratulations. Read, Write, Own. I really enjoyed this book. And I agree with you strongly that there's a few things that are deeply off about the modern technological sphere. And it's time to change those things. So thanks for writing this.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.